My friends, have you ever noticed that the most powerful moments in life are often the quietest? The most beautiful sunrise does not make any noise, yet fills our hearts with peace. The most loving gaze between two people doesn't require words, yet it communicates more than entire books could. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is fullness. When you learn to embrace silence, you are 16 hours, and God, you discover that you already own everything you have been chasing in the noisy world outside. We live in times where noise has become our daily background. Social media notifications, traffic sounds, endless conversations. But amidst this chaos, the ability to remain silent becomes a superpower. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strength. God, when you are silent, you don't lose anything. In fact, you gain control over yourself, your relationships, and even your destiny. Ours and God, when life feels heavy and everything seems uncertain, the first thing we need is clarity. God, without clarity, we cannot move forward with confidence. We hesitate, we doubt, we stumble. But how does clarity come? 16 hours in God. It does not come from endless talking or from overthinking the same problem again and again. Clarity comes when the noise is reduced, when the mind settles down, when we allow ourselves a pause of silence. Just imagine a glass of water filled with mud. If you keep shaking it, the water will remain dirty and unclear. God. But if you place it down and leave it undisturbed, slowly the mud settles at the bottom and the water becomes crystal clear. The same is true for our mind. In silence, the unnecessary thoughts begin to settle, and suddenly the path ahead becomes visible. And God, think about the moments when you had to make a big decision in life. Perhaps it was choosing a career or deciding whether to continue a relationship or moving to a new city. If you were surrounded by constant opinions, arguments, and noise, your mind must have felt restless. Everyone says something different, and you end up more confused than before. But when you stepped aside, sat in silence and God, and listened to your own inner voice, you felt clarity slowly emerging. That is the power of silence. It allows you to hear what you truly want, and not what the world expects from you. In fact, silence is not empty, it is full of answers. It is like a mirror that reflects your real self when there are no distractions. And God, many people think that if they stop talking and sit quietly, they are wasting time. But silence is never a waste of time. Silence is an investment and God, because in that quietness you gain something more valuable than anything else. Direction. Without silence, you may run very fast, but in the wrong direction. With silence, you may move slowly, but every step is purposeful and right. Even in our daily lives, small doses of silence can transform us. God, when you wake up in the morning and take just a few moments to be still before jumping into the rush of the day, you carry a clearer mindset. When you practice silence, before responding to someone in anger, you save yourself from regret. When you spend a quiet moment before sleep, you allow your mind to reset and prepare for tomorrow. Silence, therefore, is not something you practice only in meditation or retreat. It is something you carry into every moment of life. God's clarity is not outside. It is already within us. But we can see it only when the dust of noise settles. And that settling happens in silence. When we understand this, we realize that silence is not absence, but presence. The presence of clarity that can guide our lives in the right direction. It is often assumed that silence is a weakness, that if you don't reply immediately, you have lost the battle, or if you don't shout louder than the other person, you will be ignored. But in reality, silence is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. And God. Think about it carefully. Anyone can react. Anyone can raise their voice. Anyone can throw back words in anger. That does not take power. That takes impulse. True power lies in restraint, in holding back, in choosing silence when your ego desperately wants to speak. God. The ability to remain silent in heated moments is like having an unshakable fortress around your heart. While the world expects you to fight back, your silence communicates something much deeper. That you are in control, not the situation. When someone provokes us, our natural instinct is to prove them wrong, to defend ourselves. But in doing so, we often lose our inner calm. Words fly, tempers rise, and later we regret what was said in the heat of the moment. Silence, however, saves us from this trap. It may seem passive from the outside, but silence is an active choice. And God, it is the decision to protect your energy, your dignity, and your peace of mind. It takes far more courage to stay quiet when you are burning inside than to scream back. Silence is not running away. It is standing tall without being shaken. Think of the ocean. Its surface may be disturbed by waves, but deep down it is calm, vast, and unmovable. A person who has mastered silence is like that ocean, appearing composed even when storms surround them. And that composure is real strength. In fact, when you remain silent, the other person begins to lose their power. They expected a fight, but you did not provide one. And God. They expected resistance, but you gave none. Your silence makes their noise look empty. In that moment, you own the situation, because nothing can be used against you. Silence also has an invisible authority. 16 hours and God. Have you noticed the most respected leaders and wise people do not speak unnecessarily? Their words are rare, but when they do speak, everyone listens. Why? Because their silence gives weight to their voice. When you are not constantly reacting, explaining yourself, your silence builds strength in your character. People begin to realize that you cannot be easily shaken, and that realization commands respect, ours and God. In daily life, silence as strength can save relationships, careers, and inner peace. Instead of reacting to every insult, every misunderstanding, or every bit of criticism, choosing silence allows you to rise above. 16 hours in God, it does not mean you never speak. It means you choose the right time, the right place, and the right words. And when you finally do speak, your words carry a power that cannot be ignored. That is the strength of silencing. It is not the absence of response, but the presence of mastery over yourself. There are moments in life when words are not enough, and silence speaks louder than anything we could ever say. We often believe that communication is only about talking, explaining, or convincing. 16 hours in God. But some of the deepest bonds in our lives are formed and nurtured not by endless conversations, but by the comfort of being silent together. Think of two old friends sitting on a park bench, watching the sunset. God. They may not exchange a single word for hours, yet the bond between them feels alive and strong. God, that is the magic of silence. It deepens relationships in ways words cannot. When we are silent with someone, we send an unspoken message. I am comfortable with you. I do not need to fill the space with noise because your presence is enough. This unspoken understanding creates trust. With words, we may sometimes exaggerate or hide, but silence is honest. It reveals the authenticity of a relationship. You know the strength of a bond not by how much you talk, but by how peacefully you can share silence without feeling awkward. That level of comfort is a sign that the relationship is genuine. In conflicts too, silence can protect and strengthen relationships. When two people are angry, words become weapons. Once spoken, they cannot be taken back. But if even one person chooses silence in that heated moment, the fire begins to cool. That silence becomes a space for reflection instead of destruction. Later, 16 hours in God, when the storm has passed, conversations can happen with more love and less ego. Many relationships would survive if people learned the art of silence during arguments. Silence does not mean ignoring the problem. It means giving the problem space to settle before addressing it wisely. In families, silence often carries love more than words. A mother sitting quietly beside her tired child, a father working late without saying a word, but showing care through action, or siblings sharing a meal without much conversation. These silent moments create bonds that words cannot capture. Even in romantic relationships, silence often says, I am here, I understand, I accept you. Sometimes holding a hand in silence is more healing than speaking 1,000 comforting sentences. Silence in relationships is not about distance. It is about depth. It creates room for emotions to flow naturally. It allows the heart to speak its language, which words often fail to express. When we embrace silence, God, we realize that true connection is not about constant talking, but about shared presence. And when we master this, our relationships become stronger, gentler, and more meaningful. Most of us think communication is all about speaking, but in truth, the greatest gift silence gives is the ability to listen. Listening is not just hearing words. It is understanding emotions, catching what is left unsaid. God, and connecting with someone at a deeper level. But listening cannot happen in noise of 16 hours in God. Because when our own mind is busy with replies, judgments, and distractions, we are not truly hearing the other person. Silence, therefore, becomes the foundation of genuine listening. When we stay silent, we give space for others to open their hearts, and at the same time, we allow ourselves to hear the quiet whispers of our own inner world and God. Have you noticed how often in conversations people interrupt each other? Instead of listening, they are already preparing their response, and God, waiting for the other person to pause so they can jump in. That is not listening, that is competing. True listening requires silence within. When you are silent, you do not just hear words. You hear pain, joy, hesitation, and the story behind those words. Many times, people do not need advice. God, they only need someone to silently listen to them without judgment. In those moments, you're silenced in hours in God. Your silence becomes more comforting than any well-crafted sentence you could offer. Silence also helps us listen to ourselves. We live in a world where external voices are constantly telling us what to do. Advertisements, social media, family, friends, society. If we are not careful, these voices drown out our own. The 16 hours in God, that is why many people feel lost or confused. They have forgotten the sound of their own heart. But when we pause and sit in silence, slowly the inner voice becomes audible again. It may not shout, but it always guides. This inner listening is what brings us closer to our true purpose. Without silence, you 16 hours in God, we risk living by everyone else's expectations while ignoring the life we were meant to live. Even in spiritual practice, 16 hours in God. Silence has always been considered sacred because it sharpens our ability to listen. The sound of the wind through trees, the song of birds, and God, the rhythm of our own breathing. These simple experiences become profound when we are silent. And in that state, we realize that life is always speaking to us, but we rarely listen. Silence trains us to tune in. Listening through silence changes relationships, decisions, and even our emotional state. It makes us wiser, kinder, and more present. In a noisy world where everyone wants to be heard, the one who chooses silence and listens deeply stands apart. That person not only understands others, but also understands themselves. And that is a gift far greater than speaking. It is the gift of truly hearing life. There is a priceless treasure we all seek in life, and though we may give it different names. Some call it happiness, others call it contentment. But in truth, what we are all searching for is peace. And one of the most powerful ways to protect that peace is through silence. Not every situation requires our reaction. Not every comment deserves a reply. And not every battle is worth fighting. When we learn to stay silent in moments of provocation, misunderstanding, or unnecessary conflict, we shield our inner calm from being disturbed. Silence, in this way, becomes our greatest guard, a protective wall that saves us from losing our peace over things that, in the bigger picture, hardly matter. Think about the number of arguments people get into daily. over traffic, small mistakes, or even petty opinions on social media. Each time we respond to such negativity, we give away a part of our energy, and at the end of the day, we feel drained. But if we choose silence instead of reaction, we walk away with our peace intact. Silence does not mean weakness. It means you value your peace more than proving a point. And when peace is valued, life becomes lighter. Silence also prevents us from being trapped in the cycle of negativity. Imagine someone insults you. The natural instinct is to respond with anger, to give them back the same energy. But that only escalates the situation, and before you know it, the exchange of words turns into bitterness. Silence, however, breaks this cycle. It refuses to feed the fire. Over time, people realize that you cannot be provoked easily, and that awareness itself discourages unnecessary conflict. In this way, and God, silence not only protects your peace, but also gradually transforms your environment. Peace is also about protecting our mental space. When we carry unnecessary words, arguments, and gossip in our minds, we clutter it with noise. But silence helps us filter. By not engaging in every debate or responding every comment, we create space for calmness and clarity. That calmness is like fresh air for the mind, God allowing us to focus on things that truly matter. In relationships too, silence saves peace. Every disagreement does not need to turn into an argument. Sometimes the wisest thing to do is to remain silent, let emotions cool, and then approach the matter with a calm mind. Many relationships break not because of problems, God, but because people could not control their words in anger. And God, silence at the right time can be the bridge that holds two hearts together. Protecting peace is not about escaping life. It is about choosing battles wisely. And silence gives us the wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay quiet. In that quietness, peace finds its shelter, and once peace is preserved, everything else in life feels richer and more meaningful. There is a priceless treasure we all seek in life, though we may give it different names. Some call it happiness, others call it contentment. But in truth, what we are all searching for is peace. And one of the most powerful ways to protect that peace is through silence. Not every situation requires our reaction. Not every comment deserves a reply. And not every battle is worth fighting. When we learn to stay silent in moments of provocation, misty hours in God, misunderstanding or unnecessary conflict, we shield our inner calm from being disturbed. Silence, in this way, becomes our greatest guard and God, a protective wall that saves us from losing our peace over things that, in the bigger picture, and God hardly matter. Think about the number of arguments people get into daily over traffic, small mistakes, or even petty opinions on social media. Each time we respond to such negativity, we give away a part of our energy, and at the end of the day, we feel drained. God. But if we choose silence instead of reaction, we walk away with our peace intact. 16 hours in God. Silent does not mean weakness. It means you value your peace more than proving a point. And when peace is valued, life becomes lighter. Silence also prevents us from being trapped in the cycle of negativity. Imagine someone insults you. The natural instinct is to respond with anger, to give them back the same energy. But that only escalates the situation. And before you know it, the exchange of words turns into bitterness. Silence, however, breaks this cycle. It refuses to feed the fire. Over time, people realize that you cannot be provoked easily, and that awareness itself discourages unnecessary conflict. In this way, silence not only protects your peace, but also gradually transforms your environment. Peace is also about protecting our mental space. When we carry unnecessary words, arguments, and gossip in our minds, we clutter it with noise. But silence helps us filter. By not engaging in every debate or responding to every comment, we create space for calmness and clarity. That calmness is like fresh air for the mind, allowing us to focus on things that truly matter. In relationships too, silence saves peace. Esteem ours in God. Every disagreement does not need to turn into an argument. Sometimes the wisest thing to do is to remain silent, let emotions cool, and God, and then approach the matter with a calm mind. Many relationships break not because of problems, but because people could not control their words in anger. And God, silence at the right time can be the bridge that holds two hearts together. Protecting peace is not about escaping life. It is about choosing battles wisely. And silence gives us the wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay quiet. In that quietness, peace finds its shelter. And once peace is preserved, everything else in life feels richer and more meaningful. God, there comes a point in every human life when we begin to feel that the things we see, touch, and own are not enough. The heart longs for something deeper, something beyond the material world. That is where silence becomes sacred, because silence is the bridge that connects us to the divine. In silence, we do not just calm the mind, we open a doorway to the eternal. It is in those still moments that we sense a higher power at work, whether we call it God, nature, a 16,000 God, or the spirit within. Noise distracts us from this connection, but silence draws us closer to it. Imagine standing on a mountain early in the morning. The air is still, the sky slowly brightens, and the world is quiet. In that silence, in ours and God, you feel small yet deeply connected to something vast and infinite. God. No sermon or speech could match that feeling. It is silence that delivers it. God. When the mind is quiet, the divine becomes more visible, more accessible, and more present. We realize that the divine does not need dramatic rituals or grand declarations. It reveals itself in stillness. This connection is not limited to mountains or temples. It can happen anywhere. Even in the middle of a busy day, if we pause, close our eyes, and sit silently for a few moments, we can sense a deeper presence. Silence strips away the distractions that blind us to the sacredness of life. In silence, and God, we feel gratitude, awe, and humility. We remember that we are not the center of the universe, but part of something greater, and that realization is deeply spiritual. For centuries, seekers across cultures have valued silence as a path to the divine. Monks retreat into silent meditation, saints sit in solitude, and spiritual teachers encourage quiet reflection. Why? Because silence purifies. It allows the soul to breathe without being suffocated by worldly noise. In silence, we stop asking for things and start experiencing presence. We stop complaining and start appreciating. This is where prayer becomes more than words. It becomes a state of being. Even in ordinary life, silence can awaken us to divine moments. Watching a child sleep peacefully, sitting by the ocean waves, or simply observing the night sky. These silent experiences connect us to something far beyond ourselves. The divine is always there, but silence is the key that unlocks our awareness of it. In the end, silence is not just about connecting to ourselves, present God. It is about connecting to the eternal truth that surrounds us. When we embrace silence, we discover that the divine was never far away. It was always within us, waiting for us to listen. And in that sacred stillness, the heart finds its highest peace and deepest joy. Emotions are powerful forces. They can lift us to the highest joy or drag us into the deepest sorrow. But the real question is, do we own our emotions or do our emotions own us? Too often, we become slaves to anger, fear, or sadness. A small insult can disturb our peace for days. And God, a failure can paralyze us with self-doubt, and sudden fear can stop us from moving forward. This is where silence becomes our greatest ally. Silence does not suppress emotions. It helps us master them. In silence, we do not run away from what we feel. We learn to understand, balance, and rise above it. Think about anger. When someone provokes us, our first reaction is to lash out. Words shoot out like arrows, actions follow, and later regret sets in. But if we pause in silence, even for a few seconds, the fire begins to cool. That pause creates a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap lies our power. Silence is not weakness in the face of anger. It is the strength that prevents us from being controlled by it. It allows us to respond wisely instead of reacting impulsively. The same is true for fear. Fear often speaks loudly in our minds. What if you fail? What if you're not good enough? In the US 16 hours and God. What if everything goes wrong? These thoughts create so much inner noise that we freeze. But when we sit in silence, breathing slowly, the volume of fear begins to lower. Silence reminds us that fears are often exaggerated stories our mind tells us. In quietness, we find courage to move forward because silence brings perspective, and perspective weakens fear. Silence also heals sorrow. When we experience loss or disappointment, God, people around us may try to comfort us with words. But sometimes words only deepen the word. What truly helps in those moments is silence. The silence of sitting with our pain, letting the heart release its weight and slowly finding peace again. Silence does not erase grief, but it creates a space where healing can begin. Mastery over emotions does not mean we stop feeling. It means we stop being ruled by what we feel. Silence is like a teacher that trains the mind to pause, observe, and then choose the right response. When we cultivate silence, we become less reactive and more composed. We own our emotions instead of being owned by them. And that mastery is what gives us true freedom. In daily life, just a few moments of silence before reacting transform everything. Silence before anger saves relationships. Silence before fear strengthens courage. Silence before sadness brings acceptance. This is the quiet strength that keeps us steady amidst the storms of life. Silence, in its gentle way, gives us complete ownership of ourselves. And when you own yourself, nothing outside can control you and God. Words are powerful, but their true value is often lost because we use too many of them. God. In a world where everyone is speaking, shouting, and constantly expressing opinions, words have become cheap. But when they emerge after silence, they gain weight, depth, and meaning. And God's silence is like the frame around a painting. It gives the picture its importance. Without silence, words are just noise. With silence, words become treasures. That is why silence is not the absence of communication. It is what makes communication meaningful. Imagine a person who speaks all the time, offering endless explanations, arguments, or advice. 16 hours in God. Eventually, people stop listening because their words blend into the background. God. Now think of someone who speaks less, who listens more, and who chooses their words carefully. When such a person finally speaks, everyone pays attention because silence has given their words authority. Their speech carries impact, not because of volume, but because of timing. Silence makes words rare, and what is rare is always precious. Even in our personal lives, silence before speaking can save us from regret. How many times have we said something in anger that we wished we could take back? Words, once spoken, cannot be erased. But when we hold them in silence, even for a few moments, we get the chance to measure their impact. Silence teaches us to use words as medicine rather than weapons. A kind word after silence can heal, while a harsh word spoken without pause can wound deeply. Think about music. What makes a song beautiful is not just the notes, but also the pauses between them. Without those silent gaps, music would be chaotic noise. The same is true for conversation. Silence between words makes them clearer, sharper, and more powerful. Just as light shines brighter in darkness, words shine brighter after silence. Silence also gives us the wisdom to recognize when not to speak at all. Sometimes silence itself is the answer. In moments of conflict, silence can dissolve tension. In moments of misunderstanding, silence can give space for clarity to emerge. In moments of deep connection, silence can express more than any words could. Silence and speech are not enemies, they are partners, and silence gives speech its true dignity. Ultimately, silence transforms our words from ordinary to extraordinary. It teaches us that speaking is not about filling the air, but about delivering meaning. When we learn to pause, to reflect, and then to speak God, our words no longer become part of the noise around us. They stand out, they inspire, and they endure. Silence, therefore, is the power behind powerful words. And God, true wealth is not measured by what we own on the outside, but by what we feel on the inside. 6 hours and God. The world constantly tells us that happiness comes from more possessions, more achievements, and more recognition. Yet, history and experience both prove that even those who have everything materially can still feel empty, restless, and unsatisfied. Silence reveals the opposite truth and God. When you can sit quietly with yourself and feel content, you realize you already own everything. 16 hours and God. In silence, happiness is no longer tied to things. It flows from within. Think about it. The richest person is not the one with the most money, but the one whose mind is at peace. Many people chase wealth, power, or fame only to discover that their inner restlessness continues. They live surrounded by noise, external noise from the world and internal noise from endless desires. But when you enter silence, desires lose their grip and contentment begins to rise. Suddenly, you do not feel lacking. You feel complete. You feel abundant. And that inner abundance is a form of wealth that cannot be stolen, taxed, or destroyed. Silence also teaches gratitude, and gratitude is the key to true richness. When you sit in silence and reflect, you begin to notice the small things, the breath keeping you alive, the beauty of nature around you, the relationships that support you, 16 hours in God, the opportunities you've been given. In the noise of daily life, these blessings are overlooked. But in silence, you see that you are already surrounded by treasures. A gratitude turns what you have into enough, and more than enough, 1,000 hours, and that is the wealth of the silent heart. Moreover, silence liberates us from comparison. God, much of our unhappiness comes from comparing ourselves with others. What they have and God. What they achieved, what they look like. This constant measuring creates restlessness. But when we turn to silence, we step away from the race. We stop looking outward and begin to look inward. In that inward journey, we find satisfaction that no comparison can shake. The moment you realize that your worth is not defined by external possessions, you discover a wealth greater than gold. This wealth is freedom. The freedom to enjoy life without constantly wanting more. The freedom to rest without guilt. The freedom to be happy without reason. God. When silence teaches us to be content in the present moment. God, we carry a treasure that cannot be bought or sold. You may own little in the eyes of the world, but in your heart, you own everything. That is the silent truth in real wealth, is not in having and God, but in being. And when silence fills your being, you live like the richest soul alive.